The year is 1723 and William Stukely is riding horseback through this landscape, the Dorset rolling hills here. And he jumps off his horse having spotted something that caught his eye, something he might have seen before but not here. This was new to him, so he jumped back on his horse and decided to explore the feature he'd seen in the landscape. To him, this resembled something he'd seen maybe 20 miles or so northeast of here, but this seems so much longer, so much more substantial. 6 miles later and Stukely finally came to the end of this monument. Now Stukely had already made an assumption about what that feature was back the other side of Stonehenge. The feature, he said, had a really specific and unique purpose, and so much so he decided to name that feature after that purpose, even though it turned out that that would be wrong. So Stukely at the time, he didn't realise that the monument over towards Stonehenge, the other side of Stonehenge, and the one here in these Dorset hills, which starts just by that clump of trees up there, he didn't realise they were essentially the same type of monument, the same features, the same era. And subsequently this one here in Dorset received that wrong name. Of course now we're stuck with that, and we have been for the last 300 years or so. Welcome to the story of the Dorset Cursus. So what exactly was this feature in the landscape? Why did Stukely think it was comparable to the one beyond Stonehenge? And why did he spend so much time documenting this and writing everything down and drawing pictures? Well, the answer is to come and have a look at it. I say come and have a look at it. I think you're going to have to rely on the aerial shots. Can you see the feature I'm looking at now? This is the start of this feature. So we have what looks like a bottle top. In fact, we have two, but this is the one that we're interested in. It took Stukely quite some time to map this because it was without doubt the largest of its kind, the largest of its classification. And it turned out to be over 3 times longer than its Stonehenge counterpart. So there's not a huge amount to see on the ground here. You can work out some markings, of course, from the drone shots. Now, as we flip over to the map, well, that indicates we are looking for some significant earthworks. 2 parallel lines around 80 to 90 metres apart. So here, 10 miles southwest or so of Salisbury, at the start of this Dorset Cursus, up there by the trees, the long barrow that's still there today. Well, we can't see a huge amount in the ground, it's all been ploughed out. But according to the map, there is a lot more to see. Now we have the dotted line heading southwest on the map, which shows us the probable course, and we do have a lot more earthwork, so that holds a bit of promise onwards through the Dorset rolling hills. Discovered by Stukely in 1723, soon after the discovery of the Stonehenge Cursus. Now at this point, Stukely had already made his mind up that this monument back at Stonehenge should be referred to as a Cursus. He saw this as a chariot racing venue, a Circus Maximus, and he thought that the Romans were here and they constructed these to race horses and chariots. And like the rudimentary amphitheatre that we see here in Britain, you just assumed that that was here for their entertainment. And I guess that kind of adds up. It was an entertainment venue, and thus the name Cursus stuck. Now I'm always picking holes in poor William Stukely, and I'm confident at the time I wouldn't have made any better assumption than he did about what this was. Perhaps I wouldn't have claimed it was such authority, but I can see why Stonehenge Cursus gave him that impression. We have both that monument and this with a bank and an external ditch. So what did Stukely think when he found this one, the 6-mile-long chariot racing Cursus? Maybe too late to think beyond the original claim. That would kind of be it for the next 200 years or so. Very little attention was given to this huge monument, perhaps because of its scale and size, perhaps because it was just a bank and a ditch as parallel lines through the landscape. And of course, even here now, well, it's been ploughed out completely. However, I'm holding out hope for what's behind the camera up in the trees, because what's in there will also give us some extra context to this. Come and have a look at this. Things did change though in the 1950s. It was too late to save this, but people did start doing archaeology, and they did try to understand what this monument was. I've gone off the beaten track a little bit. I'm probably where I shouldn't be, but that's quite important to me today because there's 2 things I'd love to show you and see myself. First of all, we have remnants of this cursus that we're talking about right there. This is the inner bank of the southern of the two parts of the monument. If I maybe spin the camera around, you can see again the line of trees there. Well, that is on the top of the bank of the cursus. The outer bit there, well, that would be the ditch on that side, and you have a mirrored part of that just up here. But we also have something else that's hugely important and is going to tell us a lot about today's story just through the trees here. Come and have a look. So during the 1950s, things started to move forward. I am now exploring the northern section, and I call it that for good reason, because in the 1950s this was identified as two separate structures, two separate cursuses, albeit joined together now. The southwestern end was said to be slightly earlier. We'll come back to the dating very shortly. So Atkinson gave us the measurements detailed here on the diagram. He suggested the inner bank measured 4 or 5 feet high and 30 feet in its agger. The external ditch, almost a mirror, measuring 30 feet across, 3.5 to 4 feet deep, and of course mirrored on the northern side. Well, I almost missed it. I almost missed the thing that I really wanted to show you. I was so obsessed with the bank and the ditch of the cursus, I nearly missed this. And what I'm looking at right now is quite spectacular. Okay, I don't know if you can see that there through the trees, but this is the northern bank of the cursus. The northern bank that stretches 6.25 miles through the Dorset landscape. On this very bank, if I spin the camera around here, you'll see the tail end there of a long barrow. And it turns all the way down there, maybe about 100 metres, maybe 50 metres, to the huge tree there in the distance where it becomes its fullest on that end. And as I say, this long barrow sits right on top of one of the banks in perfect alignment with it. Wow. So in terms of man-made objects, man-made features on the landscape, this here is a long barrow, and this is probably one of the oldest features that you will see that was made by man in Britain. And in fact it lies on top of that northern bank of the cursus. Well, that probably gives us the biggest clue to today's story. Okay, the first thing we can do is have a look at something we absolutely know the date of. Now, you probably know what I'm going to say. This right here is the Ackling Dyke, which is the sort of probably the Saxon name, I guess, for Roman road Margery number 4, I think, Silchester down to Dorchester. And it was one of the earliest Roman roads in this country. I think it was built 43 AD. And we know that this cut across and over and through the cursus, so we can date the cursus as pre-Roman. I love that. We can do some archaeology without actually lifting a shovel or a spade. Move forward to the early 1980s. Here, well, I say here, have a look up here and I'll show you the exact spot, at least as far as I'm aware. Let's climb the Roman road. Oh, okay, it's a bit of a windy day today, so bear with, but right there in that field. Now, Atkinson, back in the 50s, he didn't do a lot of digging, more detail, but this team now laid out a huge set of pits and digs and cross sections across the cursus. It gave us a really good picture of this northern section. The ditch was steep sided and flat bottomed. It was noted that the southern side was slightly shallower and may have been recut more than once. You see, because Atkinson didn't dig, well, he didn't really find anything of substance, but these digs in the field just across there, well, they gave us so much. They gave us flint knapping, they gave us early Neolithic pottery, animal bones, they gave us antler picks. These both gave us radiocarbon dates spanning 3500 to 3000 BC. There was one more vital piece of evidence though, one that would help us not only date this earthwork, but also help us understand this landscape and perhaps give us context to this monumental feature that cut its way across the Dorset hills. What a gorgeous view ahead of me. I'm taking this Roman road up towards Gussage Down. Now, Gussage Down, Gussage, that rhyme with anything. Gussage Down has this maze of earthworks from all eras, from Neolithic to Bronze Age bowl barrows to Iron Age enclosures to more recent medieval abandoned villages. Gussage has a little bit of everything, and we're heading there for good reason. So the most important thing for us today now up here on Gussage Down isn't any of those eras other than one, the Neolithic, and we're concerned about that exact long barrow right there. Let me tell you why. So you have to excuse the wind today because we're very high up here on Gussage Down, certainly compared to the rest of the landscape. And that's important because that long barrow there sits right in the middle of the Cursus. That long barrow, if I was to be able to stand on top of it now and look that way, well, I'd see another long barrow, 1.5 miles, which marks the end or the start of the Cursus in the southwest. And if we turn the camera around 180 degrees and again I was to stand on top of that long barrow and look that way, well, I'd look at the other end of the initial Dorset Cursus, 1.5 miles or so in that direction, where I was just earlier stood by the tree line. And this long barrow in the middle of this section, well, that would have been clearly visible from either end of this Dorset Cursus, well, at least this initial phase. Now here is the important part. Just below Gussage and its long barrow to the northeast, oddly we have a deviation. In fact, we have 2 deviations in 200 metres. So as we said, from the end point, the northeastern point of the initial Cursus phase 1, we can see this long barrow. But if I was to walk from here to there, as I approach Gussage Down, I sink into the landscape and now the long barrow is out of view. Perhaps in building this Cursus in that direction it went slightly out of alignment. We're talking around a 2-mile stretch and we're talking the Neolithic. Now the northern end of the Dorset Cursus, the second phase, which now forms part of the whole phase, well, that second phase does have some similar properties to this one. The end down there at Thickthorn Down, well, that's mirrored on the newer end. That's mirrored in terms of the way it has a long barrow sort of that runs parallel or in line with its end point, that bottle top. And of course we do have other long barrows contained on that second phase. Second phase is probably the wrong word because it indicates something a lot longer, further in the distance, but it probably wasn't too far after because we do have that long barrow sat right on top of it. Let's get to the juicy part. Let's get to what we think this was for. Now, before we look at the logical explanations for this, let's rule out a couple of illogical ones. We can start with Stukely, where we started this. I don't want to take a lot away from Stukely. I'm sure if I was around in his time, the 1720s, I'd have looked at this and the Stonehenge Cursus as a similar thing. But we now know this is at least 3,000 years prior to the Romans arriving, so we can rule that out. Secondly, whenever you mention ditches, dikes, people get all excited about water and canals. Let's rule that out with some common sense. This is a chalk landscape, it's extremely porous. Water drains here very well and very quickly, and we have absolutely no evidence of a clay lining or similar. We also have a very undulating landscape. So what does that leave us with knowing? We have the long barrows built on top of it in the alignment of it. I feel like we can certainly say with confidence that the long barrows came first, because back at Gussage Down, where we have that deviation which almost wants to make this passageway, this structure, line back up with the long barrows, certainly from this point of view here, and we're at the most northwestern end of the first Cursus, of course, looking back that way. Okay, very quick post edit. I love that idea that the long barrows came first and the Cursus came after, to sort of mark that route in the landscape and join them all up. However, I've got a good archaeologist friend who suggests that actually the Cursus were often very early Neolithic and didn't necessarily need to be associated with long barrows. They were often there as sort of enclosures, and perhaps was an association with rivers or river confluences, and perhaps that the long barrows came after to mark their significance on that enclosure and on that part of the landscape, and it was continued to be used for a very long time thereafter. Either way, whatever came first, there is one more really important thing to consider here. Okay, so take this if you will. Now, the northwestern end, the most northern western end of that first Cursus sits right behind me in the field. Now if I was to sit there, it's a bit windy now so I'm not, if I was to sit and look back that way at the top of Gussage Down, where the long barrow is and where that Cursus line follows and goes right up to the long barrow at the top of the hill, well, if I did that on the 21st of December, the winter solstice, well, the sun would set perfectly, in my view, behind that long barrow. I guess we'll we'll never really know what it was for unless we do some more archaeology and more science along here, which will give us those answers we need. And if this is your type of content, then you're going to love the playlist we've got just up here, a whole load of prehistory mysteries. I've been Paul, thanks for watching.